The screens flickered to life without warning. Every television, every computer, every communication device across 47 human worlds suddenly displayed the same image. A creature sat upon a throne of black metal, its 6 eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. This was Supreme Overlord Krathens of the Talvather Imperium, ruler of 10,000 worlds across the galaxy. Admiral Dion was in his quarters aboard the battleship Indomitable when his screen activated. He had been writing a letter to his daughter on New Jeju, telling her about his upcoming retirement. The letter would never be sent. Humans, Krathens spoke, his voice translated into every human language simultaneously. You are children. Weak children who stumbled into the stars and dared to claim space as your own. Today, you will learn the price of your arrogance. The image shifted. New Jeju appeared on the screen, the beautiful blue and green colony world that fed half of human space. Over 10 billion people lived there, farming the rich soil, raising families, living peaceful lives. Admiral Doyen's hands began to shake. His daughter was down there. His 3 grandchildren were down there. Above the planet, the Talvather fleet moved into position. 300 warships, each larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons began to glow with gathering energy. President Haijin sat in the emergency command center deep beneath the capital city. Around her, generals and advisors watched in horror as the broadcast continued. She had spent 5 years building diplomatic relations with the Talvather Imperium, trying to negotiate peaceful coexistence. All of it meant nothing now. The first beam struck the northern continent of New Jeju. The land simply vanished, replaced by a spreading sea of molten rock. The second beam hit the southern hemisphere. Then a third. Then a fourth. The Talvather were methodical, ensuring every inch of the planet burned. Captain Minho stood in the briefing room of the Special Operations Headquarters, surrounded by his team. These were humanity's finest soldiers, trained for impossible missions. But there was nothing they could do now. They could only watch as their people died. The broadcast showed it all. Cities evaporating in nuclear fire. Oceans boiling away into steam. The atmosphere itself burning as the planet's surface temperature rose beyond anything that could support life. The Talvather made sure every human saw every detail. Children watching with their parents. Elderly in their homes. Soldiers on distant ships. Everyone saw. 6 hours. That's how long it took to kill 10 billion people. 6 hours of continuous bombardment that reduced a thriving world to a bowl of cooling slag. And through it all, Krathens sat on his throne, watching. His expression never changing. Dr. Sunhee sat alone in her laboratory, beneath the research facility on Earth. She had dedicated her life to medicine, to healing, to building a better future. On her desk sat classified files she had never opened, projects she had never pursued, weapons that humanity had sworn never to build again. Her hands moved toward the files, then stopped. Not yet. But soon, when the bombardment finally ended, Krathens spoke again. This is the fate of those who defy the Imperium. You have 30 days to surrender unconditionally. Every human world must submit. Every ship must be disarmed. Every colony must accept Talvather governance. If you refuse, another world will burn. Then another. We will continue until you submit or until there are no humans left. The broadcast showed numbers scrolling across the screen. Casualty estimates. Final count. 10,427,394,817 dead. Over 10 billion souls extinguished in 6 hours, broadcast live for all humanity to see. You are weak, Krathens continued. You chose peace, and peace has made you soft. You build farms instead of warships. You study art instead of warfare. You are unworthy of the stars you inhabit. Surrender, and you will be allowed to exist as servants of the Imperium. Resist, and you will be annihilated. You have 30 days to decide. The screens went dark. For a moment, there was only silence across human space. Then the screaming began. The crying. The rage. 10 billion people gone. Families destroyed. Children orphaned. Parents left childless. An entire world murdered while humanity watched helplessly. Admiral Doyen sat motionless in his quarters, staring at the dark screen. His daughter's name was Mireille. She had been 32 years old. A teacher. Her children had been 7, 9, and 12. They had wanted to be a doctor, an engineer, and a farmer. Now they were ash and vapor, scattered across what remained of New Jeju. President Hai-Jin stood before the emergency council. Every face showed the same expression: shock, grief, and something else. Something cold and hard and ancient. She had seen that look in history books, in old videos from centuries past when humanity had nearly destroyed itself. It was the look that appeared before great and terrible things happened. "Madam President," one of the generals said quietly, "we need to respond." "Yes," she said. "We do." She walked to the broadcast station, her footsteps echoing in the silent halls. Technicians scrambled to set up the transmission. Within minutes, every human world would receive her message. Every ship would hear her words. And the galaxy would be watching. President Hai-Jin looked into the camera. Her face showed no emotion. Her voice was steady and cold. "You have made a terminal mistake." 7 words. That was all. The broadcast ended. Across human space, people understood. The Tal Vathr had awakened something humanity had tried very hard to bury. They had pushed past every line, broken every law, committed the ultimate crime. They had slaughtered children while their families watched. The galaxy would learn what humans became when their children were murdered. The Tal Vathr Empire had no idea what was coming for them. But they would learn. They would all learn. Deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, in a vault that had not been opened for 500 years, something ancient waited. The archive. Humanity's darkest memories, sealed away when they finally chose peace over endless war. Dr. Sunhee stood before the massive doors with 47 other representatives, one from each human world. Well, 46 now. New Jeju would never send another representative. The doors required unanimous approval to open. Every colony world had to vote yes. Every single one. The vote took 4 hours. Not because anyone hesitated, but because they wanted every person on every world to understand what they were about to unleash. This was not a decision made in rage, though rage burned in every human heart. This was a choice made with full knowledge of what it meant. The vote was unanimous. The doors opened. Inside, the archive stretched into darkness. Weapons designs from every era of human history. Tactical doctrines from 10,000 wars. Chemical formulas. Biological agents. Nuclear weapons. Relativistic kill vehicles. Quantum destabilizers. Every method humans had ever devised to kill other humans, all carefully documented and preserved. And with them, something worse, the psychological warfare techniques, the torture methods, the ways to break not just bodies but minds and spirits. Humanity had been very, very good at killing. They had practiced on themselves for millennia before reaching the stars. The resource wars of 2340 had nearly ended the species. 2 billion dead in 5 years. Nuclear fire consuming cities. Bioweapons turning entire regions into death zones. It had taken the complete destruction of Australia and half of Asia before humanity finally stopped and looked at what they had become. They chose peace. Real peace. They disarmed. They destroyed 90% of their weapons. They built farms instead of warships. They studied art and music and literature. They swore never again, but they kept the archive. Just in case, President Hyjin addressed the people 12 hours after the doors opened. The Talvather believe we are weak because we chose peace. They think peace made us soft. They are wrong. We chose peace because we knew what war made us. We chose peace because we were too good at war, and it nearly killed us all. Today, we remember what we are capable of. Today, we show the galaxy why humanity chose peace in the first place. Across human space, the transformation began. Every factory retooled for war production. Every shipyard began building warships around the clock. Every mine extracted resources at maximum capacity. The industrial might that had built 47 thriving worlds in 300 years turned toward a single purpose: total war. Ji-hoon stood in line at the recruitment center. He was 23 years old. He had been a student studying engineering. His parents had lived on New Jeju. His younger sister had lived on New Jeju. His girlfriend had lived on New Jeju. They were all gone now. He had watched them die on the broadcast like everyone else. "I want to volunteer for whatever kills the most of them," he told the recruiter. The recruiter, a scarred veteran, looked at him with understanding. "Black Fleet Initiative. It's dangerous. Survival rate is 20%. I don't care. Sign here." Engineer Yoonji walked through the civilian shipyards, her mind racing with possibilities. The Talvather had shields that could deflect conventional weapons. Their armor could withstand nuclear strikes. Their ships were massive and powerful, but they had never fought humans before. They didn't know what humans were capable of when properly motivated. She began designing modifications to civilian vessels. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. Passenger liners became troop carriers. Mining ships, built to withstand asteroid impacts and radiation, became armored destroyers. And she added something the Talvather had never encountered: experimental faster-than-light jump technology that left no radiation signature. Ghost ships that could appear, strike, and vanish. Intelligence officer Taeyang sat in his dark office, studying everything humanity knew about the Talvather Empire. They ruled 10,000 worlds, but they ruled through fear and overwhelming force. Most of their empire consisted of conquered species, slaves forced to serve. The Talvather themselves numbered only about 500 billion across their entire empire. He began drafting psychological warfare operations, broadcasts that would go out to every enslaved species in Talvather space. Messages that would tell the truth about Krathenos. Information about resistance movements. Encouragement to rebel. The Talvather had made their empire through fear. Tang would break it the same way. Dr. Sunhee worked in her laboratory, surrounded by data from the archive. She had found something interesting: complete genetic mapping of 12 Talvather, specimens captured over the years in border skirmishes. Their DNA was unique, different from any other known species in ways that could be exploited. She began designing something terrible: a nanotech weapon, smaller than bacteria, that would spread through contact and air. It would be harmless to every species in the galaxy except one. It would target Talvather genetic markers specifically. The Reaper virus. She wept as she worked, knowing what she was creating. But her hands never stopped. 25 days after the massacre, Admiral Do-yun stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Retribution. Around him in space, 2,000 warships hung in formation. The first Retribution fleet. Behind them, 10 more fleets were under construction. 50,000 warships total would be ready within the year, but they wouldn't wait that long. The ships weren't elegant. They weren't beautiful. They were brutal, efficient killing machines built with one purpose: to destroy the Talvather Empire. Humanity had spent 300 years building a peaceful civilization, They had designed these ships in 25 days. Admiral Doyan activated the fleet-wide communications. Attention, all personnel. We are about to begin operations against the Talvothar Empire. They killed our people. They murdered our children. They broadcasted to make us afraid. But they made a mistake. They didn't make us afraid. They made us remember. He paused, looking out at the assembled warships. 500 years ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself because we were too good at war. We chose peace. We built instead of destroyed. We created instead of annihilating. The Talvothar saw this and thought we were weak. They were wrong. We weren't weak. We were trying to be better than what we are. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as the void between stars. They wanted to see what humans become when you slaughter our children. Let's show them. Fleet, prepare to jump. We're going hunting. 2,000 warships activated their drives and vanished into faster-than-light space. The war had begun. Captain Minho's team materialized in the darkness of the Talvothar supply depot. 6 soldiers, invisible to sensors, moving through the shadows like ghosts. They had infiltrated deep into enemy territory using the new jump technology, appearing inside the facility without triggering a single alarm. The depot supplied 50 Talvothar worlds with food, ammunition, and equipment. 3,000 soldiers guarded it. Minho's team didn't fire a single shot. They moved through the ventilation systems, placing small devices at key locations. The devices were simple. They would slowly replace the oxygen in the facility with an odorless, colorless gas that would put everyone to sleep, permanently, within 6 hours. 3,000 Talvothar soldiers simply didn't wake up. The facility's automated systems continued working, unaware that everyone inside was dead. Minho's team took everything useful, destroyed everything else, and vanished before anyone noticed. They left behind a message written in Talvothar symbols on the main wall. This is mercy. We can do worse. Operation Phantom Blade was happening simultaneously on 50 Talvothar worlds. 50 teams, each with their own objectives. They didn't attack military targets directly. They did something much more effective. Intelligence officer. Taeyang's broadcast began reaching the enslaved species within the Talvothar Empire. The messages were simple and true. The Talvothar are not invincible. They are dying. They attacked humanity, and humanity is destroying them. Rise up. Fight back. We will help you. The broadcasts included detailed information about Krathonus and his commanders, where they lived, what they feared, how they maintained control, secret locations of Talvothar weapon stockpiles that rebels could raid, coordinates of lightly defended military outposts. Everything a resistance movement needed to know. On the Talvothar world of Kreshvar, a slave species called the Myken received the broadcast. They had been enslaved for 300 years, forced to mine radioactive materials that slowly killed them. They had tried to rebel twice before. Both times, the Talvothar had executed 1 million Myken as punishment. This time was different. This time, they weren't alone. The broadcast told them exactly where the Talvothar kept their atmospheric weapons, the ones they used to threaten entire planets. It told them which officers commanded which installations. It told them when the shift changes happened, the Myken rose up. So did 16 other enslaved species across the Talvothar Empire, all on the same day. The Imperium suddenly had internal revolts on 17 worlds, all coordinated, all supplied with intelligence they shouldn't have had. The Talvothar had to divert forces to suppress the rebellions. Forces that could have been used against humanity. Dr. Sunhee's creation, the Reaper virus, was deployed on a Talvothar military world called Drathnor. A single infiltration team released it in the main spaceport. The virus was engineered to spread rapidly through contact and air, but it was completely harmless to every species except a tall single quotes Voth AR. Within 3 days. Every Tal Vother on Drathanor was dead. 200 million of them. But the other species living on the planet, slaves and support personnel from a dozen different races, were completely unharmed. The virus killed only its intended target. The Tal Vother couldn't understand it. A plague that killed only them? Impossible. But the bodies proved otherwise. They began to panic, wondering if their own biological weapons had somehow mutated and turned against them. The truth was worse. Humanity had created something that made them vulnerable while protecting everyone else. Taiyang made sure footage of the plague's effects was broadcast on every Tal Vother world. Soldiers dying in their barracks. Officers collapsing in their command centers. The message was clear. Nowhere is safe. We can reach you anywhere. We can kill you whenever we choose. Engineer Yunji's ghost ships struck like nightmares. They would appear from nowhere, fire their weapons, and vanish before the Tal Vother could respond. The new jump technology left no radiation signature, no way to track where the ships had gone. They could jump into a system, destroy a dozen targets, and be gone in minutes. The Tal Vother tried everything to counter them. They deployed sensor nets. They positioned ambush fleets. They tried to predict human movements. Nothing worked. The ghost ships appeared where they wanted, struck what they wanted, and disappeared. It was psychological warfare as much as military tactics. The Tal Vother never knew when or where humans would strike next. Ji-hoon served on one of the ghost ships, a modified cargo hauler renamed Shadow Strike. His team specialized in hit-and-run attacks on Tal Vother communication relays. Cut their communications, blind their forces, make coordination impossible. He had expected to feel satisfaction when killing Tal Vother soldiers. Instead, he felt nothing. Empty, hollow. His family was still dead. His girlfriend was still gone. Killing Tal Vother didn't bring them back. But he kept fighting anyway, because someone had to, and because the alternative was letting their deaths mean nothing. After one particularly successful raid, his captain found him sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. "You doing okay, soldier?" "No, sir. But I'll keep fighting. That's all any of us can do." The war was only 3 weeks old, but the Tal Vother Empire was reeling. They had expected easy victory over soft, peaceful humans. Instead, they were fighting ghosts that appeared and vanished, plagues that killed only them, and revolts among their slave populations. Their empire was fracturing from within, while human ships struck from without. Supreme Overlord Krathanus watched the reports with growing fury. 50 worlds experiencing revolts. 17 supply depots destroyed. 200 million dead from a mysterious plague. Communication networks disrupted. His forces scattered, confused, unable to coordinate effectively. How? He demanded of his advisors. How are they doing this? They're supposed to be weak, peaceful. Where did they learn to fight like this? One of his advisors, braver or more foolish than the rest, spoke quietly. Perhaps, Overlord, they were never actually weak. Perhaps they chose not to fight, and we made them change their minds. Krathanos killed the advisor with his bare hands. But the words stayed with him. He had studied humans before ordering the attack on New Jeju. Their history was filled with warfare. They had nearly destroyed their own species in conflicts that spanned centuries. They had invented weapons of horrifying power and used them on each other. Then, mysteriously, they had stopped. They had chosen peace. He had thought peace made them weak. Now he understood. They hadn't become weak. They had become disciplined. They had learned to control what they were. And he had given them permission to stop controlling it. Send a message to the home fleet. he ordered. "We're going to Earth. 5,000 ships. We'll crush their homeworld and end this before it gets worse." His remaining advisors said nothing. They had seen the reports. They knew what humans were capable of when pushed. But no one wanted to be the next person Krathanos killed for speaking the truth. The Talvather assembled their fleet and began the journey toward Earth. It would take them 2 weeks to arrive. Plenty of time for humanity to prepare. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Diane received the intelligence report about the incoming fleet. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had set a trap and watched their enemy walk right into it. "All according to plan," he said quietly. "Send a message to all defensive forces. Operation Final Gambit is now active. Let's show them what happens when you threaten Earth itself." The Talvather fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 5,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled by the Imperium. Supreme Overlord Krathanos stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and gazed at the small blue world hanging in the darkness ahead. Earth, humanity's birth world. He would burn it like he had burned New Jeju, and this time the entire galaxy would watch. No species would dare oppose the Talvather after this. His sensors showed only 500 human ships defending the planet. 500 against 5,000. The humans had apparently concentrated most of their fleet elsewhere, leaving their homeworld vulnerable, foolish, desperate, typical of a dying species. "All ships, advance," Krathanos ordered. "Destroy any resistance. Prepare orbital bombardment weapons. I want every human on that planet to see their death coming." The fleet moved forward in perfect formation. They crossed the orbit of Neptune. Nothing. They passed Uranus. Still nothing. Saturn's rings glittered in the distance. The 500 human ships held position near Earth, making no move to intercept. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Doyon watched the enemy fleet advance. Around him, the bridge crew worked in silent efficiency. They had prepared for this moment for weeks. Every calculation checked and rechecked. Every system tested and retested. The entire Sol system had been transformed into something the Talvather had never encountered before. A weapons platform. Distance to Saturn? Doyon asked. "Talvather fleet is entering Saturn's orbit now, sir. Activate the Saturn defense grid." Hidden among Saturn's rings, thousands of automated platforms powered up. They had been placed there over the past 3 weeks, disguised as ice chunks and space debris. Each platform contained a mass driver, a weapon that accelerated tungsten rods to 30% the speed of light, relativistic kill vehicles. Physics became a weapon. At those speeds, a small rod had the kinetic energy of a nuclear bomb, but with no radiation, no warning, and no defense. Shields meant nothing. Armor meant nothing. The rods simply passed through matter as if it wasn't there. The platforms fired simultaneously. Thousands of tungsten rods streaked toward the Talvather fleet at 90,000 kilometers per second. The Talvather sensors detected them too late to react. The rods hit the fleet like the hammer of an angry god. Ship simply exploded. Shields flickered and died without slowing the projectiles. Armor vaporized on impact. 300 Talvather warships were destroyed in the first 10 seconds. Their debris created a spreading cloud of shrapnel that damaged dozens more ships. "Report," Krathanos demanded, his composure cracking. "Unknown weapons fire from Saturn's rings. 300 ships destroyed. No radiation signature. No energy weapons detected. Sir, they're firing solid projectiles at relativistic speeds." "Impossible. No one has that technology." "The humans do, sir." The Talvather fleet scattered, trying to escape the kill zone. They reformed their ranks and pushed forward, shields at maximum, point defense systems active. They would overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer numbers. They reached Jupiter's orbit. Admiral Dayan smiled. Activate the Jovian swarm. Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, had been converted into a production facility. For 3 weeks, every factory on Ganymede had built one thing: autonomous combat drones. Each drone was the size of a human fist, powered by a microfusion reactor and equipped with a small warhead. 10 million drones launched from Ganymede like a swarm of angry insects. The Talvather point defense systems opened fire, destroying thousands of drones. But for every one destroyed, 10 more got through. The drones were too small, too numerous, too fast. They attached themselves to Talvather ships like parasites and detonated. Smaller ships died immediately. Larger ships lost their shields, their weapon systems, their engines. The drones targeted critical systems with disturbing precision. The swarm flowed through the Talvather fleet like a river of death, leaving crippled and dying ships in its wake. Another 500 ships destroyed. 1,000 more badly damaged. Krathenos watched his fleet being torn apart. Continue forward. We still outnumber them. Reach Earth and bombardment range. The fleet pushed on, bleeding ships with every kilometer. They reached Mars orbit. Engineer Yunji had been very busy at Mars. Activate the Martian Defense Network, Dayan ordered. Mars had been equipped with concentrated solar collectors, massive arrays that gathered sunlight and focused it into coherent beams. The arrays pivoted toward the Talvather fleet and fired. Beams of pure solar energy, each one carrying the power of a small star, lanced through space. Tal single quotes Voth AR shields held for perhaps 2 seconds before overloading. The beams cut through ships like a knife through paper. Capital ships that could withstand nuclear weapons simply melted under the concentrated stellar radiation. The vacuum of space filled with vaporized metal and plasma. Another 1,000 ships died. The Talvather fleet was in full retreat now, trying to escape back out of the system. But humanity wasn't done. Between Mars and Jupiter, floating in the empty space, were devices the Talvather sensors couldn't detect. Quantum mines. They activated when the fleeing ships came near. The mines didn't explode. They created something worse: temporary singularities. Black holes that lasted only microseconds. But that was enough. Ships caught in the gravitational fields were simply crushed out of existence, compressed into points of infinite density before the singularities evaporated. 200 more ships vanished into the quantum mines of the 5,000 ships that had entered the Sol system. Fewer than 1,000 remained functional. And now the 500 human ships that had been waiting near Earth finally moved forward. Captain Minho's boarding teams launched from the human fleet, targeting crippled Talvather ships. They were hunting for one ship in particular, the Eternal Dominion. Krathenos' flagship. Jihun was part of the boarding team. They cut through the flagship's damaged hull and fought their way to the bridge. The Talvather fought desperately, but they were disorganized, panicked, and facing humans who had trained for this exact moment. Minho himself found Krathenos in the command center, surrounded by dead bodyguards. The Supreme Overlord held a weapon, but his hands were shaking. "You can't do this," Krathenos said. "I am the Supreme Overlord of 10,000 worlds." "You were," Minho replied. "Now you're a war criminal." Drop the weapon. For a moment, it looked like Krathenos would fight. Then he saw the look in Minho's eyes. The cold, absolute certainty. He dropped the weapon and fell to his knees. "I surrender." "I know." The battle was over. Of the 5,000 ships, 4,000 were destroyed. The survivors were crippled and being rounded up by human forces. The Sol system had become a graveyard of Talvather ambition. President Haijin stood before the cameras, knowing the entire galaxy was watching. Behind her, In chains knelt Krathenos. She spoke calmly, clearly, her words carrying to 10,000 worlds. Let this be a lesson to every species in the galaxy. Humanity chose peace. We built worlds instead of weapons. We studied art instead of warfare. We did this because we knew what we were capable of, and we chose to be better. The Talvather mistook our choice for weakness. They murdered 10 billion of our people to prove their strength. She paused, letting her words sink in. This is what happens when you harm our children. This is what humanity becomes when you force us to remember what we are. Any species that attacks humanity or our allies will face the same fate. This is not a threat. This is a promise. We wanted peace. You gave us war. Now suffer the consequences. The broadcast ended. The galaxy had its answer. Humanity was not weak. They had simply been trying not to be strong. Admiral Doyen's fleet didn't stop at Earth. The victory in the Sol system was just the beginning. The Talvather Empire needed to understand that their atrocity would have consequences. That reached all the way back to their homeworld. First Retribution Fleet jumped into Talvather space with 2,000 warships. They didn't attack civilian targets. They didn't glass planets full of innocent people. Instead, they systematically destroyed every military installation they encountered. Shipyards became clouds of debris. Military academies were reduced to rubble. Defense platforms were obliterated. Weapons factories were turned to slag. The message was clear. Humanity would dismantle the Talvather military capability completely. But they would not become the monsters who had murdered New Jeju. Every strike was precise. Every target was military. Civilian casualties were avoided whenever possible. This was justice, not genocide. The Talvather tried to mount a defense, but their fleet was shattered. The ships that escaped the Sol system brought tailies of weapons that defied belief. Relativistic kill vehicles, quantum mines, drone swarms, solar beam weapons. The Talvather military, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, discovered what it felt like to be helpless. Captain Minho led a different kind of operation. His special forces teams had a list of names. 2,847 names. Every Talvather official who had voted to approve the New Jeju massacre. Every officer who had commanded ships during the bombardment. Every politician who had publicly supported the action. They hunted each one down methodically. No rush, no mistakes. They found them in their homes, in their offices, hiding in bunkers. Some tried to fight. Some tried to run. Some begged for mercy. It made no difference. Each one was captured alive and brought to await trial. The captures took 6 weeks. Minho's teams moved through Talvather space like ghosts, taking their targets one by one. The Talvather government collapsed into chaos as its leadership vanished. Some officials surrendered immediately, hoping for clemency. Others went into hiding. But humanity had patience and time. They would find everyone responsible. Intelligence Officer Taeyong watched as the Talvather Empire fractured. The 17 species that had rebelled during the initial attacks now declared full independence. With the Talvather military destroyed, there was no one to stop them. Other enslaved species saw their chance and rose up as well. Within 2 months, the Talvather Empire had broken into 400 independent states. Krathenos himself sat in a cell aboard the Retribution, awaiting trial. He had expected execution immediately after capture. Instead, he waited while humanity did something he hadn't anticipated. They were being fair. President Haijin addressed the human worlds. The Talvather murdered 10 billion of our people. They did it deliberately. They broadcast it to terrorize us. But we will not respond with blind vengeance. We will respond with justice. Every person responsible will face trial. Every crime will be documented. Every victim will be remembered. The galaxy will see that humanity seeks justice, not merely revenge. The trial was held on New Jeju itself, on the scorched surface where 10 billion people had died. Engineers had built a temporary facility there, equipped with everything needed for proper legal proceedings. Representatives from 87 species came to observe, to ensure the trials were fair. The first part of the trial took 6 weeks. The prosecution read the names of every victim. All 10,427,394,817 of them. Names, ages, occupations. Children who had wanted to be doctors. Parents who had been teachers. Elderly who had survived previous wars only to die in this one. The reading continued day and night, 6 weeks of names. Krathenos was forced to listen to every single one. By the end of the first week, he stopped trying to show defiance. By the end of the second week, he was crying. By the end of the 6th week, he was a broken shell of what he had been. The trial itself was straightforward. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage of Krathenos ordering the attack. Communication logs showing his approval. Testimony from survivors and witnesses. The Talvather defense lawyers, appointed by the court to ensure fairness, could only argue for mercy. The judges, drawn from multiple human worlds, deliberated for 1 day. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of genocide. Guilty of crimes against sentient beings. Guilty of mass murder. The sentence was not death. Death was too easy. Instead, Krathenos and his 2,846 co-conspirators were sentenced to life in prison on New Jeju. They would spend the rest of their lives rebuilding what they had destroyed. They would plant trees where cities had stood. They would create gardens where children had played. They would live among the ashes of their crime until the day they died. Dr. Sunhee attended the sentencing. She had created the Reaper virus, a weapon that killed only Talvather. After the war ended, she sealed all her research again, adding her own access codes to the archive. Next to her work, she left a note. Never again, unless necessary. We became monsters to stop monsters. Remember what that cost. She returned to her real work, developing medical treatments and therapies. The war had taken something from her, some basic faith in the goodness of existence. But she would keep working, keep trying to heal, because someone had to, and because the alternative was accepting that the darkness won. Across the galaxy, the response to humanity was mixed. 87 species formally apologized for not intervening during the New Jeju massacre. They had watched it happen and done nothing, either from fear or indifference. Now they understood that inaction had consequences. 34 species requested defensive pacts with Earth. They wanted humanity as an ally, not an enemy. President Hygiene considered each request carefully. Some were accepted. Others were declined. Humanity would not become the new Talvather Empire, spreading through the galaxy by force. But they would protect those who asked for help. The 17 species that had rebelled during the war all gained their independence. Humanity provided them with resources to rebuild, technology to defend themselves, and trade agreements to help their economies. The former slaves of the Talvather Empire became free peoples, and many of them remembered who had helped make that possible. Admiral Do Yun retired after the trials concluded. He spent his remaining years on New Jeju, overseeing the construction of a memorial. The memorial was simple, a wall with 10 billion names carved into it, and a flame that would burn forever. Visitors could search for names, find their loved ones, and remember. Dayan found his daughter's name, Myray, and his grandchildren. He visited the wall every day until he died, 5 years after the war ended. His last words were simple. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, but I made sure they paid for what they did." Captain Minho, became the head of the Terran Intelligence Service. He never stopped hunting. Even years after the war, he pursued Talvothar war criminals who had escaped justice. His teams found them one by one and brought them back to face trial. He never married, never had children. The war had taken something from him that could never be replaced. Jehoon survived the war, part of the lucky 20%. He returned to civilian life and became a teacher, like his mother had been. He taught history to young students, making sure they understood what had happened. The cost of peace, the price of war, how easily one could become the other. He told his students about New Jeju every year on the anniversary of the massacre. He made sure they knew the names of at least some of the victims. He wanted them to understand that those weren't just numbers. They were people. Real people with hopes and dreams and families. Engineer Yoonji led the reconstruction efforts for New Jeju's orbital structures. The planet itself would take centuries to become habitable again, but the orbital stations could be rebuilt. She designed them as a monument to what had been lost and a promise that humanity would never forget. Intelligence officer Taeyang wrote the definitive historical account of the war. His book, The 30 Days That Changed Everything, became required reading across human space. He documented everything: the massacre, the response, the battles, the trials. He wanted future generations to understand exactly what had happened and why President Hai Jin served one more term, then stepped down. "I did what was necessary," she told her successor. "I unleashed humanity's capacity for violence to stop a greater evil. But now we need peacetime leaders again. People who can help us rebuild what we are, not what we became." She spent her retirement on Earth, writing her memoirs and speaking to groups about leadership during crisis. She never claimed to be a hero. She had made terrible decisions, authorized terrible weapons, sent people to die. The fact that it was necessary didn't make it good. 50 years after the massacre, humans across all 46 worlds observed the silence. 6 hours where everything stopped. No work, no entertainment, no noise, just remembrance. People stood quietly, thinking about what had been lost, thinking about what humanity had become to avenge that loss, thinking about the choice between peace and violence, and how thin the line between them really was. A young girl asked her grandmother about the war. The old woman, who had fought as a young soldier on the ghost ships, looked at her grandchild with sad eyes.